Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman laid out 7 key priorities in Budget 2023. Inclusive development, infrastructure investments, unleashing potential, green growth, financial sector, youth power and reaching the last mile. Some of the big announcements: increasing capital investment outlay by 33% to 10 lakh crore, continuation of 50-year interest-free loans to state governments, highest ever capital outlay of 2.4 lakh crore for railways, 100 transport infrastructure projects, creating urban infrastructure in Tier 2 and 3 cities. On the fiscal consolidation front, the government is targeting fiscal deficit to be below 4.5% by 25-26. The government made changes to customs duties with the aim of achieving greater domestic manufacturing and higher exports. How do global think tanks and industry chambers view this budget? Will this increase FDI and more China Plus One investments into India? We're now joined by Richard Rossow, Senior Advisor and Vadvani Chairholder in US-India Policy Studies at CSIS. Also joining us is Alexander Slater, Managing Director at USIBC. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Rick, if I can begin with you, this was supposed to be a populist budget, an election budget, but do you think this is delivered on all fronts and will attract investments from abroad as well?
Well, it feels to me like it was a fairly conservative budget. You thought that maybe it would be a populist budget appealing to voters with 10 state elections a year away from the national election. But the blowout spending programs that sometimes we've seen from the center or from state governments really weren't there, which is pretty good news. You know, at the same time, it's also a unique opportunity for India to draw in a lot of that investment that's been drawing away from China, you know, trying to secure a greater share of global supply chain investment. There were some elements in the budget that certainly contribute to that. But nothing that seems that it was kind of overridingly focused on those supply chain evolutions there. So it kind of fell in between. No big blowout spending for the elections coming up, but also relatively minor things in terms of trying to lure those investments from overseas. So pretty conservative, and I think most are viewing it as a pretty comfortable budget and one that has a lot of support.
Right, Alexander. When it comes to the capex allocation, we saw a capital investment increase of 33%. The total capital investment would be 10 lakh crores. How do you see this? And do you feel that the implementation of this, the execution, would be key?
Absolutely, Parikshit. It's great to be here. Nice to see you. Rick, good to see you as well. Thanks for having me on. On the question, I think that the capital investment is something that the government sees as a way to make sure that the growth targets that they've laid out are achieved. That, combined with the reforms of the direct taxation regime, are going to help stimulate both investment and consumption, at least public investment and then private consumption. Overall, infrastructure investment is generally something that is a medium-term driver of economic growth and productivity and job creation. I don't know how quickly we'll see this in the actual economy. As you say, it depends on the types of things that it's spent on, when the spending happens, and project execution. But generally, it's a good thing. And I think that it's one way for a government that, for a budget that, as Rick said, is somewhat in between what one might have expected to continue attracting foreign investors. I think the government has said that, or it seems to have taken the position that India, being the fastest growing large economy in the world next year and this year upcoming, is going to be the main attractor of investment. We didn't really see a lot of structural reforms that we'd seen in prior budgets here that foreign investors tend to like as well. Right.
Speaking about structural reforms, Richard, if I can get you in, do you feel that there could have been more that the FM could have done in terms of ease of doing business, easing compliances, easing the indirect tax structure to get more investments, get more manufacturing into India?
Well, a lot of what has to happen are things that happen outside the budget. You know, as Alexander mentioned, as you brought up as well, greater allocation towards developing infrastructure. You also saw what I think are some really important seeds that the government has started to grow or is looking to initiate with expanding resources for courts to begin digitizing. Because again, even though the World Bank is kind of abandoning the doing business report, when you looked at it, one of the areas that India was usually pretty far behind most other countries with which India is competing for investment was remediation through the judicial system. So there's been a lot of great studies and surveys that have been done where that can really be accelerated, and this backload of cases can be drawn down dramatically through better digitization of courts. And one small issue that hasn't been brought up a lot that I really love, that was referenced in the budget speech, was that the finance ministry is going to begin working with municipal governments in India to begin ring fencing resources, helping them develop their own revenue streams. Because ultimately, too, you can't have a national government that's solely in charge of spending everything that's required for infrastructure. In the United States and a lot of other developed countries, you have a robust municipal finance regime, and in India, that's largely lacking. And so if the finance ministry can really put its nose to the grindstone this year, following on an important Reserve Bank of India report a few months ago talking about the state of municipal finances, again, it's long term, as Alec mentioned. A lot of this isn't going to be an immediate pop, but when you start thinking about teeing the government up for the next 5 years in case they win re-election or whatever, some interesting seeds are planting in the budget and in the budget speech.
Right. Alex, coming to you, there were a long list of recommendations that industry chambers, global industry chambers like USIBC had submitted before the finance minister. What, according to you, were some of the misses in the budget, and which, according to you, were critical for the Indian economy this year?
So I think the key thing that foreign investors are looking for out of investments in India, in addition to the growth number, which I do think the government's efforts will deliver on, are structural reforms that make it a more level playing field for doing business and it easier to do business. Something that wasn't there was an effort to further ease processes for tax dispute resolution. A lot of companies end up operating based on shared services agreements, and there's sometimes disputes with the government about how much a headquarters should be charging a local subsidiary in India about that, and that results in unnecessary tax headaches for companies. And so, we were looking for those changes. I think in the financial sector, making it, putting banks, whatever their origin, on the same footing from a taxation perspective, putting the same thing in place in terms of regulatory frameworks for governance and dividend distributions for insurance companies. These are all things that I think, again, were structural reforms that will help attract foreign investment in these sectors. But I don't think, again, that was what this budget was about. This budget was about delivering on the top line growth number for the year, and that being the selling point in a world where growth is slowing substantially. So foreign investors are going to look around the world and say, what are my options? And I think this government, in advance of an election, didn't want to take on the challenging structural reforms it may have done in prior years. This being said, there is something that we are following very, very closely, a couple of things. The finance minister made a reference to significant reforms in the financial sector that will be taking place with consultation with industry where feasible. We think that this holds a lot of promise. We don't know exactly what she was referring to because there wasn't a lot of detail there, so we're watching it very carefully. I do think that the commitment to consultation with industry, though, is important. We look for transparent, predictable, and consistent consultation with industry to make sure that all stakeholders are represented in the process and that the best policy comes out and we mitigate risks so that there's certainty given to those who are investing in India. Ultimately, I think this is an approach that should be expanded not merely to all sectors beyond the financial sector. So we'll be watching that closely. There are two other things that we're going to be watching closely as well. One is the data governance policy, where we hope that companies doing business in India, whatever their origin, have the same access to that data. If you look at the history of UPI, multinational companies have been integral to the spread of digital payments in the country and the uptake of UPI's usage. And then finally, this National Financial Registry, National Register of Financial Information. Pardon me. We've got to make sure that private companies that hold a lot of this data take part in that, and that the government or that this new structure adequately leverages what they bring to the table so that it delivers a cutting-edge product.
Okay, Rick, coming to you, you had also spoken about the need for lower tariffs on input goods. When we want to play a bigger role in global supply chains, there had been an expectation that inputs coming from China and other countries, the tariffs should be reduced so that India can have a strategic advantage in terms of exports. How do you think the government did when it came to rejigging the customs duties on a range of products?
Well, I mean, if you're in a couple of sectors that were specifically targeted, if you're involved in the fisheries industry or something related to lab-grown diamonds or cell phones or TV panels, you did pretty well, right? You saw some reductions in terms of inputs that are critical for those sectors. Similarly, you still have a strain of I think, protectionism, not as strong in this budget as we've seen in previous years. But if you're in sectors that, for instance, in producing gems and jewelry or electric vehicles, bicycles and toys, you saw customs duty increase. And so kind of making a bet that production of those items, in India is most likely to expand, and there's manufacturers ready to take off. So, this mix of incentivizing production through customs duty reductions and some input goods, and encouraging local manufacturing through protecting finished goods, it's narrow, it's sectoral. So, here you got a few winners and losers, I would say, but not this all-on rush in terms of all the sectors that you see, from production-linked incentive programs or sectors that are announced in Make in India. So it felt a little more narrow, either in terms of protections or incentivizing, the import of input goods than I might have expected at this point in time. It's not really a political issue. It should have been fairly safe and comfortable, but a few sectors were targeted, not really the entire economy.
Right. We've run out of time, but thank you very much, Rick Rossow and Alexander Slater, for joining us with your observations on the Indian budget. Let's see how the government implements this and how the consultation on the regulatory regime, different policies, happens in the days to come. Thanks once again for being with us. We're going to take a short break here on Global Eye, but coming up, India and the United States have agreed to significantly elevate their initiative on critical and emerging technologies. A special discussion with former diplomat Arun Singh when we return.